Standing in this lovely space with the beautiful stained glass, the pipe organ, the piano, the vestments, the acoustics, which are a dream for any musician, all of which our forebears built and handed down to us, and which we maintain, sometimes at no small expense. In hearing today's scriptures from the 6th chapter of Luke, I experienced more than a little cognitive dissonance. In today's reading from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, we hear Jesus say, "And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt." We hear Jesus say, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you." We hear Jesus say, "Give to everyone who begs from you." In other places in the same chapter, Jesus reprimands the Pharisees for putting the letter of religious law above human need. Jesus says, "Congratulations, you, the destitute, because God's kingdom is yours." Jesus says, "Damn you, you rich people, because you have all the comfort you are ever going to get." It's easy to think that the author of Luke must have been exaggerating to make a point here, because who can live like that? We can't go around naked, right? We can't give to everyone who begs from us and still pay the rent, right? But the early communities of Christians, the first generations after Jesus, the communities who produced the Gospels, meant exactly that. They were radicals. At least some of the early Christian communities required that you give all of your wealth and possessions into the community when you converted. It's easy for us 21st century Westerners to think about these questions in individualistic terms and overlook that the Christians organized themselves into communities to accomplish this mandate from Jesus. So let's think about how we organize ourselves into community. A confession. Many Christians at one time or another will start thinking about how we might recapture this sort of engagement in the reign of God. I have a pretty deep-seated uneasiness about relying on institutions, any institution, as a pathway to find the reign of God. I have an enormous longing to find a group of misfits who meets in the basement of a church, organizes themselves as a collective, writes all of their own liturgies, sings only shape-note hymns a cappella, and generally worries more about trying to live the Gospels than run an institution. But I'm here today. I remember that the only reason that the church basement that they meet in exists is because an institutional church, probably very much like this one, exists. 12-step groups, immigrant safety training, gardening societies, craft groups, maybe even reporter societies have a place to meet because that church basement exists. Some church basements in Chicago are sanctuaries that house immigrants. I believe that pastors should have a lot of training, a living wage, health insurance, a retirement plan. We haven't figured out how to do that without an institution. You probably heard in the news that recently Mary and Buddy, a bishop of the Episcopal Church, preached at a prayer service attended by the president, preached a message very much in line with what we hear in the gospel. The president, and embarrassingly significant elements of United States Christianity, were very unhappy with what she had to say and accused her of all sorts of things that I'm not going to repeat. If it wasn't for the institutional church, Bishop Buddy would never have been in a position to preach President of the United States. Right now, there is a lawsuit brought by 27 religious groups, including the Episcopal Church, making the case that allowing immigration enforcement officers to enter churches for deportation raids irreparably harms our ability to live the gospel as we understand it. That lawsuit only exists because of institutional churches. The institutional church is not the reign of God. It's the toe in the door that lets us do things that nudge the world in the direction of the reign of God, which gives me great hope. But I think more is still needed to respond to Jesus' preaching. We today are in the process of learning how to manage this church without a hard-working, 24/7 on-site, and honestly over-functioning rector. And if it feels like in doing that, we've become a bit less ourselves, a bit more like every other Episcopal church, I'm with you. If you saw the pie chart that was presented at the annual meeting showing where we spend our money, and you cannot exactly quite square that with the gospel we heard today, I am so with you. How do we live the radical call we hear proclaimed in the 6th chapter of Luke, and really all of the scriptures? How do we manage to be as all in, living the reign of God as the early Christians, while living in the reality of today's world? How do we cherish, maintain, and perhaps grow this church without making managing the institution our biggest job? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions we face today. And I'm afraid to break your bubble, but I'm not here to answer them, at least not all by myself. As much as I admire prophetic individual voices, I believe communities working together will be the leaders in figuring out how to be Christians, how to do Christianity in today's world. St. John's is in transition right now, and the question of what sort of church we are called to be is right in front of us. So I ask you, please take time to dream about, to pray about what you hope for St. John's in the future. Participate in the coffee hour conversations Megan is leading. The next one about parish size theory is incredibly useful to understand how we operate as a community and what our options are to do that going forward. In the coming months, the search committee will be publishing the congregational assessment tool. Please, thoughtfully, prayerfully, answer that. There will be smaller group discussions to talk about where we are and where we want to go. As we do all of these things, one thing I am sure of: if we center generosity, connectedness, empathy, selflessness, community, love, the radical things Jesus teaches us in the Gospel of Luke, we will stay on the right track.